Welcome to the Peachtree Podcast. Peachtree Learning Center is a nonprofit in Middle Tennessee dedicated to training and discipling students in all the fine arts to become excellent and skilled in order to spread the kingdom of God into the world of the arts. On this podcast, we will discuss topics designed to encourage, uplift, educate, and equip people to proclaim the kingdom more deeply in their own families and communities. Hello, and thank you for listening to our podcast here at Peachtree again. We're deep in our spring semester. We've enjoyed our spring show. We're headed into recital week, which is always a big week for us. The number of private lessons we have at Peachtree has grown exponentially over the last few years, and we find it necessary to have an entire week of recitals and to be able to fit everyone in and yet not call on their good graces to sit there too long. We do strongly encourage everyone who comes and performs to stay for the whole recital that they're signed up for. It's not just about coming and watching your own child or as a student about just performing your own song and leaving, but we really try to encourage a sense of community and kind of bringing people together in each of those recitals by sharing music together and then keeping them as within a time frame that works for people so that we're not out for hours and hours. But it's always exciting to see those things come together. And then we're heading after that into the end of our semester. So we'll be wrapping things up mid-May, and it's coming to an end quickly. And every year I say, I can't believe it's already here. And this year is no exception. This year has just flown by. For all of us really that are in administration at Peachtree, it feels like this year has really just flown by quickly, and there's been such mercies over it and such grace of the Lord in everything we've done. We're eternally and always grateful for the ways He blesses us and the ways He expands our community and expands our borders and brings new people and new experiences and fresh perspectives. We're super excited about what's coming for the next year. But this is also a time of year when a lot of us as parents at the end of a school year or really at the end of any kind of season tend to reflect on what we've just come through and maybe even think about how we can make the next part better or how we can enter a fresh season or even a fresh school year with a different perspective or a more helpful point of view. And one thing that's something I started thinking about a long time ago when my children were young was just kind of the idea that, first of all, I hate seasons. I don't like the fact that they have to end. If I really like a season, I'd like to just extend it as long as I want it to be there. So I'm not a fan of how that feels. And that led me to really contemplate the concept of time. And I did a deep dive into that topic years ago and studied the word time throughout Scripture. And I studied time and where it came from. And I even went and studied it just out in the world. When did we start keeping time? How do we come up with a clock? And who was the first country that came up with the idea of time zones? And we have to be divided across the globe in 24 little sections. And just the whole idea of tracking time and keeping it. We're told to redeem the time because the days are evil. We're told that God marked time in the creation week, and just all the ways that time has been used. And one of the big concepts that surfaced in my studies was the idea that we can beat the time curse. I do believe it is part of the curse to have to live in the confines of time, and we have to act like, we have to, I guess, be thrifty with our time and use it wisely. And I remember being envious of my young children because they had no concept. They had to learn what the word tomorrow meant or learn what the word yesterday meant, or in just a minute came to mean Mom's thinking about it and I'll come back and she'll say yes. I mean, they had no concept of 60 seconds making up a minute. And so sometimes a minute was 5 seconds long because they just had no idea. And I was kind of envious of that because in my life, especially after the career I had to mark time in tenths of an hour, and I had to be responsible for every 5-minute slot. So, but the principle that came out of all that was the idea of living life backwards. And there have been a couple of stories told that were very strange about people being born old and then growing younger as they live. But I do understand the concept of looking ahead and looking far ahead in your life, or at least ahead by a certain amount of time, and trying to figure out where you want to be when you get there. So when I was a young mom, I remember, or even a young wife, I remember looking around for couples who had family structures that I admired and relationships within that structure that I really wanted to have. And I would think, how do I get there? I want to get to that place. We watched, my husband and I watched a video series about parenthood before we had children. We watched it at 2 different times with our church family back at the church we went to when we were first married. And it was a super revealing video series that talked about some things adjunct to this principle. That talked a lot about parenting your young children so that they will be the adults you want them to be. And that sounds very elementary until you get into the nitty-gritty of day-to-day living with children and trying to really just keep your head above water some days, especially as a stay-at-home mom. That was really true for me. I had always had structure. I'd always had a job. I'd always had no time to really sit and, think about things. I certainly never blew bubbles for fun as an adult. And yet, sometimes that was the most productive use of my time. And I struggled with that. I struggled with the tension that came from needing to get things done, but also needing my children to feel that I was present and that I was with them and I was involved in what they wanted to do. And so there's this tension, and that's a real thing. But the things that build relationship for the long term, what are the things that you want your family to do when they are adults? How do you want your 45-year-old children to look at you when you're 75? How do you want your children's children to be parented? Those are the kinds of questions that you ask yourself now when you have young children. And then you look around for examples of what you might think that should look like or what you'd like for that to look like. And sometimes you have to really scrounge to look for what you think God is calling you to do. And it might not be just repeating what you had growing up. For many people, what they had growing up isn't at all what would be ideal. And yet it's the easiest thing to copy. It's the easiest thing to do. As a parent, you find yourself repeating words and phrases that were given to you. And it's sometimes funny to think of the things that we repeat uselessly. One of my favorite stories about a new bride was her procedure for cooking a roast every Sunday was to cut off the end of it. She would buy a roast, she'd take it home, put it in a pot. She would cut off the end of it before she put it in the pot, and then she would cook the roast. And after several weeks of that, her husband came to her and said, "Why do you always cut the end off the roast?" Well, because my mom did. So they went to her mother and said, "Mom, hey, why do you always cut the end off your roast?" And the mom looked at her and said, "I have no idea. I do it because my mother did it." So they went to grandma and said, "Mom, why do you always cut the end off the roast?" And grandmother looked at them and said, "Because my pot was very small and the roast didn't fit." Well, that's pretty funny, but it speaks to the idea of never reconsidering or challenging what you know to do. Like it's important to kind of think about why you do what you do, and never more important than when you're a parent. And for me, a very easy thing to do, but also a non-valid thing to do, is simply to do it because it's the way it was done before. And I'm not suggesting we should challenge everything and upset the apple cart, but I am saying when you do things, find a purpose behind it. And so one of those principles I ended up using was the principle of not saying no unless I really, really had to, which meant I got really creative with doing laundry after everybody went to bed, or going to the grocery store right before they closed, or sometimes going to the grocery store before anybody got out of bed on a Saturday, because I had no time to do it during the week because nobody wanted to go do that. And it was more important that we had spent that hour I had set aside for the grocery store, going outside and doing something that somebody else wanted to do, or joining a friend who had asked us to do something. And there's just all those kinds of day-to-day decisions that build up into, this is how I want my family to look, so how do I get there? And there's just a real deep sense of nurture and community that happens when you think about having discipled children and having children who are part of the kingdom and even doing kingdom work. All of that starts when they're 1, when they're 0, when they're teeny weeny babies, and they look to you and you're there every time they need something. And you lay aside what you want to do for what they need to do. There's a building that happens and a growth that happens as a person. And it's not just for the children. It happens to mom and dad too. They become different people. You become a deeper, wider person when you sacrifice what you want to do for the sake of what your child wants to do. And it's not about getting credit for that. It's about building something that's going to last into the kingdom, and something that'll last past your lifetime. So I want to encourage you that parenting and family is not a sprint. It's not a, gee, I can't wait to get them out of the house when they're 18 so that I can go do my own thing again. It's a marathon, and you want to run that marathon, and you want to have other people running it with you and they get grown. So, and another thing I'd like to talk really quick about in this idea of living life backward is the idea of not taking offense. And in 1 Corinthians 13, it does tell us, love does not dishonor other people. Love is not self-seeking. Love is not easily provoked. It's not easily offensible. When you love someone deeply, you don't look for ways that you can get the hackles on the back of your neck up when they say something or do something that isn't what you want or what you want to hear. You're actually looking for the opposite. You're looking for good. Love seeks not its own. Love is not proud. Love does not envy. And love is not easily angered. Love is not easily provoked. When you love deeply and well, it does something to the people around you that receive that. It makes them think more long-term as well, and makes them think, how do I want to end my life? You can help other people consider those type things just by the way you pour into them. And living life, starting at the other end and coming back, it just changes the way you live today. When you think about what you want to happen at the end of your life and what you want to happen in 20 years and what you want to be happening in 5 years, it changes how you live today. So I'm going to encourage you to not look in the rearview mirror, but to look ahead and think about how you want to end your journey, and then think about what that means today looks like. So take those thoughts, use them today as you see fit and as the Lord directs you, and I hope you have a blessed day. Thank you so much for joining us today. To support this podcast, please go follow us on your podcast platform of choice. And if you're interested in knowing more about the work of Peachtree, please go visit our website at peachtreelearningcenter.com for more information.